Commander Zektar adjusted his crystalline armor plates as he walked through the detention center of Station Omega-7. The massive space station served as the Galactic Coalition's primary prison facility, housing the most dangerous criminals from across 12 star systems. His 4 eyes scanned the datapad in his clawed hands, reviewing the latest batch of prisoners. Another shipment from that backwards planet, he muttered to his second-in-command. Lieutenant Vexra. Earth, they call it. Vexra's tentacles writhed with amusement. The carbon-based bipeds? What could they possibly have done to warrant detention here? Their technology barely qualifies them for space travel. The detention center buzzed with activity as guards from various species moved between cells. The facility could hold over 50,000 prisoners, each cell designed to contain beings with different atmospheric and gravitational needs. Earth's criminals were housed in Section C7, a relatively low-security area typically reserved for minor offenders. Zektar stopped at the first Earth cell. Inside, a human male sat on the basic metal bench, staring at the wall. The prisoner file read, Marcus Chen. Armed robbery. Assault with deadly weapon. Resisting arrest. The human looked unremarkable. Average height by galactic standards, no visible natural weapons, no armored hide or toxic secretions. This one attacked a financial institution with primitive projectile weapons. Zektar read aloud. How quaint. On Zorak Prime, younglings use plasma rifles for training exercises. The human looked up at them through the energy barrier. His eyes were cold, calculating. Marcus had been watching the guards for 3 days now, noting their patrol patterns, their weapons, their blind spots. He'd already identified 17 different ways to escape. But he was waiting. Patience was something the streets of Los Angeles had taught him well. You guards look pretty confident, Marcus said quietly. That's good. Confidence is important. Zektar laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. Confident? Human. Do you understand where you are? This facility has never had a successful escape. We house Vornak assassins who can phase through solid matter. We contain stellar hunters who breathe in vacuum and tear through titanium with their bare claws. What could a primitive creature like you possibly do? Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I guess we'll find out. Moving to the next cell, they encountered Sarah Rodriguez, former leader of a human trafficking ring that had operated across 3 continents. Her file was thick with charges: kidnapping, murder, racketeering, torture. To Zektar, she seemed even less impressive than the first human. She was smaller, appeared physically weaker, and showed no obvious signs of enhancement or mutation. This female organized the capture and sale of her own species, Vexra noted. Barbaric, but hardly threatening. The Keltorian slavers we house here can mentally dominate entire populations. Sarah looked up from the book she was reading. A prison-issued text on galactic law. She'd been studying their legal system, looking for loopholes, weaknesses, anything she could exploit. Her organization hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar operation by being stupid. Officers, she said politely. I was wondering if I might request access to the prison library's legal database. I'd like to file an appeal. An appeal? Zektar was amused. On what grounds? Jurisdictional challenges, mostly. Earth wasn't a full member of the Galactic Coalition when my alleged crimes occurred. I think there might be some procedural issues with my arrest and detention. Vexra's tentacles curled with laughter. Clever for a primitive, but irrelevant. The Coalition's authority supersedes local law. When dealing with crimes against sentient beings, Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I see. What about the statute of limitations on transgalactic crimes? And the requirements for evidence preservation across different technological standards? The 2 officers exchanged glances. The human seemed to be attempting legal maneuvering, something that showed a basic understanding of civilized concepts, but ultimately pointless given the Coalition's legal framework. As they continued their tour, they encountered more Earth criminals. Tommy, the Snake Valdez, who'd run a drug empire that spanned the entire eastern seaboard. His operation had employed over 3,000 people and generated billions in revenue. To the guards, He was just another drug dealer, no different from the crystal addicts they housed from the Outer Rim. Then there was Rebecca, Ice Queen Winters, a corporate executive who'd embezzled hundreds of millions while orchestrating hostile takeovers that destroyed companies and lives. Her financial crimes had affected millions of people. But to beings who dealt with planet-scale economic warfare, her crimes seemed almost quaint. The most puzzling case was David Park, a computer specialist whose file listed him as responsible for something called cyber warfare and digital infiltration. The guards couldn't understand how manipulating primitive electronic systems could be considered a serious crime. These humans, Zektar observed, they seem to think their small-scale criminal activities make them dangerous. They have no concept of true galactic-level threat. The tour continued through several more cells. Each human prisoner appeared unremarkable by galactic standards. No enhanced musculature, no natural weapons, no psychic abilities. They were just ordinary carbon-based life forms who'd committed what amounted to local crimes on a backwater planet. What the guards didn't understand was that Earth's criminals operated in one of the most challenging environments in the known galaxy. Earth had over 7 billion humans, hundreds of different governments, thousands of law enforcement agencies, and millions of criminals all competing for the same territory and resources. Success in Earth's criminal underworld required a combination of intelligence, brutality, adaptability, and psychological manipulation that few other species had ever needed to develop. The guards also didn't realize that every human in these cells was studying them, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their assumptions. Humans were natural predators who'd climbed to the top of their planet's food chain, not through strength or speed, but through intelligence and the ability to work together when necessary. In Cell C715, Marcus was doing push-ups, maintaining his physical condition while memorizing guard shift changes. In Cell C723, Sarah was reading, absorbing every piece of information about galactic law and station operations she could access. Throughout the section, other humans were observing, planning, and preparing. They'd all been apex predators in their own environments. Now they were in a new environment, with new rules and new opportunities. The guards saw primitive criminals who'd been easily captured and contained. The humans saw opponents who'd grown complacent, secure in their technological superiority and galactic authority. Zektar completed his inspection and filed his report. Section C7 remains secure. Human prisoners show no signs of unusual activity or enhanced capabilities. Recommend maintaining current security protocols. That night, as the station dimmed to simulate evening, the human prisoners began to communicate. Not through the communication systems, which were monitored, but through subtle signals, coded messages tapped against walls, and gestures made during mealtimes. They were establishing networks, sharing information, and beginning to coordinate. Marcus had identified the shift supervisor who was susceptible to bribery. Sarah had discovered a loophole in the legal database that might be exploitable. Tommy had noted which guards seemed most frustrated with their jobs and might be turned. Rebecca was analyzing the station's economy and resource allocation, looking for pressure points. None of them knew about the message that had been sent to Earth 3 days ago. A simple communication from the Coalition Justice Department, informing Earth's authorities that their criminal transfer had been successfully completed. The message had been received by the U.S. Department of Justice, which forwarded it to the appropriate agencies. It eventually reached a small, nondescript office in Virginia, where a man in an expensive suit read it while drinking his morning coffee. He made a single phone call, speaking only 4 words. "They have our people." Within hours, that message had reached someone else. Someone whose existence wasn't recorded in any official database, whose name appeared on no government payroll, but whose reputation was known in certain circles as the most dangerous human being alive. The American boogeyman had just learned that his former associates were being held by aliens who thought humans were primitives, incapable of true violence. He began to pack his gear. The cargo freighter Times, Stellar Wanderer Times, docked at Station Omega-7's commercial port just after the morning shift change. It appeared to be a standard merchant vessel, mid-sized, well-maintained, flying under Centaurian registry. The ship's manifest listed various trade goods and a small passenger complement, all properly documented and cleared through Coalition customs. Captain Yuril barely glanced at the boarding documents as the ship's crew began unloading cargo containers. Standard procedure was routine on a station that processed hundreds of ships daily. The freighter would offload its goods, take on new cargo, and depart within 48 hours. What Captain Yuril didn't notice was that one of the cargo containers was slightly different from the others. It contained breathable atmosphere, basic life support, and a man who'd spent the 3-week journey from Earth in stasis, waiting. The man who emerged from the container in the station's cargo bay looked unremarkable. Average height, average build. Wearing standard civilian clothing, his identification listed him as Michael Thompson, a freelance technical consultant specializing in security systems. His background check showed a clean record, proper work authorization, and a legitimate contract to upgrade computer systems on various Coalition stations. Michael Thompson didn't exist. The man using that name moved through the station with the confident casualness of someone who belonged there. He'd studied the station's layout for months, memorizing every corridor, every security checkpoint, every maintenance access. He knew the guard rotations better than most of the guards themselves. He also knew exactly where the human prisoners were being held. In Section C-7, the human prisoners had been busy. 3 weeks of careful observation and subtle manipulation had begun to pay dividends. Sarah Rodriguez had successfully filed several legal appeals that tied up the station's legal department in bureaucratic knots. While the appeals would ultimately fail, they created confusion and forced the guards to spend time on paperwork instead of security. Marcus Chen had befriended a young guard named Tokmar, a rookie from a species known for their honesty and loyalty. Marcus had spent hours telling stories about Earth, painting himself as a misunderstood victim of circumstance. Tokmar was beginning to question whether the human really deserved to be locked up with dangerous criminals. Tommy Valdez had identified the guard who smuggled contraband to prisoners in exchange for favors. Within 2 weeks, Tommy was receiving small luxuries: better food, reading materials, even a primitive communication device that the guards didn't recognize as technology. But the real breakthrough came from David Park, the computer specialist. The guards had dismissed him as harmless because his crimes involved primitive Earth technology. What they didn't realize was that David had been studying the station's computer systems every time they'd allowed him access to the legal database. Earth's computers might be primitive by galactic standards, but David understood something the aliens didn't. Complexity creates vulnerability. The more advanced a system, the more ways it can be broken. And the Coalition's systems were incredibly complex. David had discovered that the station's computer network used a security protocol that assumed all access attempts would come from authorized galactic technology. It had no defenses against the kind of improvised, chaotic attack methods that Earth hackers had developed. To the system's security algorithms, David's approach was so primitive it wasn't even recognized as an attack. He'd gained access to guard schedules, prisoner transport logs, and station maintenance records. Most importantly, he'd found something that made him smile for the first time since his arrest. The station's external communication array was due for routine maintenance in 6 days. Meanwhile, Michael Thompson was settling into his cover identity. His technical consulting contract was legitimate. He'd purchased it through intermediaries from a real consulting firm that had no idea their newest subcontractor was the most wanted man on Earth. He spent his days installing software upgrades and security patches, work that gave him access to restricted areas of the station. The guards saw him as just another civilian contractor, boring and harmless. They had no idea that each system he upgraded was actually being modified to give him backdoor access. His reputation on Earth was known by many names: the Ghost, the Cleaner, the Final Solution. Government agencies that officially denied his existence still whispered his name in secure briefing rooms. Terrorist organizations that controlled entire regions went silent when they learned he was coming for them. Cartel leaders who thought themselves untouchable had simply vanished, leaving behind empty compounds and terrified subordinates. His real name was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access. What was known was that he'd been created by a program that officially didn't exist, trained by methods that violated every international law, and deployed against threats that conventional military forces couldn't handle. He was what happened when America needed someone eliminated, but couldn't officially be involved in their death. Now, for the first time in his career, his targets weren't human. On his 5th day aboard the station, he made contact. A coded message tapped against the wall of cell C715 during the evening meal period. Marcus Chen looked up from his food tray, recognizing the pattern immediately. It was a signal he'd learned 20 years ago during his brief stint in the military, before he'd turned to crime. The message was simple: package delivered, pickup scheduled. Marcus continued eating as if nothing had happened, but his pulse quickened. Someone from Earth had come for them. Someone with the skills and resources to infiltrate a maximum security galactic prison. That narrowed the possibilities considerably. The message spread through the human prisoner population within hours. Sarah Rodriguez recognized the communication protocol from her days running international operations. Tommy Valdez knew it meant serious people were taking their situation seriously. Rebecca Winters understood that someone with substantial backing was making a major investment in their rescue. David Park just smiled and continued his work on the computer systems. He'd been expecting this. Commander Zektar was reviewing security reports when the first anomaly occurred. A minor glitch in the communication array caused a brief disruption in external communications. The technical staff dismissed it as routine equipment wear, but it bothered Zektar. In 30 years of military service, he'd learned to trust his instincts about when things weren't quite right. He ordered additional security sweeps and increased monitoring of the human prisoners. The humans appeared to be behaving normally, but there was something different about their demeanor. They seemed more alert, more focused. It was subtle, but noticeable to an experienced security officer. Lieutenant Vexra suggested it might be psychological adaptation to their environment. Many species become more aggressive when confined for extended periods, she noted. Perhaps the humans are simply responding to captivity stress. Zektar wasn't satisfied with that explanation. He'd observed hundreds of different species in captivity, and the humans were exhibiting behavior patterns he'd never seen before. They weren't becoming more aggressive or desperate. They were becoming more organized. The second anomaly occurred 3 days later. A maintenance technician reported finding several access panels that appeared to have been opened recently, despite no scheduled maintenance in those areas. The panels secured critical systems, including power distribution and environmental controls. Nothing had been tampered with, but someone had definitely been accessing areas they shouldn't have. Zektar ordered a complete security review and increased patrols. He also requested background checks on all civilian personnel who'd boarded the station in the past 2 weeks. Michael Thompson's background check came back clean, as expected. The identity had been crafted by professionals who understood how galactic databases worked. But Zektar's instincts were telling him that something was wrong, and he began paying closer attention to the human contractor. Thompson was good, but Zektar was a veteran security officer. He noticed that Thompson seemed to know his way around the station better than someone who'd only been there a week. He noticed that Thompson's work often took him near sensitive areas. Most importantly, he noticed that Thompson moved like a soldier, not a technician. On the 8th day, Zektar made a decision. He would detain Thompson for questioning and run more thorough background checks. It was probably nothing, but his experience had taught him that small anomalies could indicate larger problems. He never got the chance. That night, the station's communication array went down completely. Emergency power systems activated, backup protocols engaged, but external communications were severed. The station was cut off from the rest of the galaxy. In the confusion that followed, no one noticed that the locks on Section C7 had begun to malfunction, or that a man in maintenance coveralls was moving through the detention center with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. The human prisoners were awake and waiting when their cell doors opened. They'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, and they were ready to remind the galaxy that humans hadn't become the dominant species on their planet by being weak or primitive. They were apex predators, and they were about to hunt. The emergency alarms began screaming at 0347 station time. Commander Zektar bolted upright in his quarters as his communication device buzzed with urgent messages. Multiple system failures, security breaches, and now reports of escaped prisoners from Section C7. All human prisoners have left their cells, Lieutenant Vexra's voice crackled through the communicator. Security teams are responding, but we've lost visual monitoring in that entire section. Zektar grabbed his armor and weapons. How many guards are down? None yet, sir. That's what's strange. The humans aren't fighting the guards. They're avoiding them entirely. As Zektar raced through the corridors toward the detention center, he tried to understand what was happening. A coordinated escape suggested planning and leadership, but humans supposedly lacked the technological sophistication for this kind of operation, unless someone was helping them. In Section C7, Marcus Chen was leading a group of 3 other prisoners through the maintenance corridors. The man who'd freed them, Thompson, or whatever his real name was, had given each group specific routes and objectives. Marcus didn't know the full plan, but he understood his part. Get to the armory in Security Section B5. The route Thompson had provided avoided all security checkpoints and camera positions. It also avoided the main corridors where guards were rushing to respond to the alarms. Marcus's group moved through the station's infrastructure like ghosts, invisible and silent. Sarah Rodriguez was leading her group toward the administration center. Her objective was the main computer core, where David Park would join her to complete whatever he'd been working on for the past 3 weeks. Sarah had run complex operations before, but nothing like this. The level of planning and coordination required to pull off a simultaneous breakout from a maximum security galactic prison was staggering. She was beginning to understand that their rescuer wasn't just some government operative. This was someone who operated at a level that most people couldn't even imagine. Tommy Valdez had the most dangerous assignment: creating diversions to draw security forces away from the critical areas. His group was armed with improvised weapons they'd been crafting from prison materials, and their job was to make noise without actually engaging in serious combat. Rebecca Winters was heading for the financial systems. Her white-collar crimes had given her expertise in economic warfare, and she understood that the best way to cripple any large organization was to attack their resource allocation and communication systems. But the most important mission was being carried out by the man they only knew as Thompson. Commander Zektar reached security control to find chaos. Half the security systems were offline, communication with patrol teams was intermittent, and the guard force was scattered across the station, chasing multiple groups of escaped prisoners. Status report, he barked at the duty officer. 17 humans escaped from Section C7. We've identified 6 different groups moving through the station. 3 groups appear to be heading for critical systems. 2 groups are creating diversions. And 1 group we've lost track of completely. Zektar studied the tactical display. The human movements showed coordination and planning that indicated detailed knowledge of the station's layout and security protocols. How could they know our security arrangements? They've been in prison for weeks. Sir, another officer interrupted. We're receiving reports of sabotage throughout the station. Power conduits have been cut in specific patterns that maximize disruption while avoiding backup systems. Someone with engineering knowledge is directing these operations. The truth hit Zektar like a plasma blast. The contractor. Thompson. Where is he? Unknown, sir. He's not responding to communication requests, and we can't locate him on internal sensors. Thompson was moving through the station's core systems, areas so restricted that even most security personnel had never seen them. His route took him past the main power generator, through the environmental control center, and finally to his primary objective: the command and control nexus. The Coalition had built Station Omega-7 to be impregnable. Its security systems were state-of-the-art. Its guard force was composed of elite soldiers from a dozen different species, and its location in deep space made escape seemingly impossible. But the designers had made one critical error. They'd assumed their enemies would think like them. Human military doctrine was fundamentally different from galactic standard practices. Where other species focused on direct confrontation and technological superiority, humans had developed concepts like asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and systematic destruction of enemy infrastructure. Thompson had spent 3 weeks studying not just the station's defenses, but its psychology. He understood that the guards were confident in their superiority, dismissive of human capabilities, and unprepared for tactics that didn't fit their experience. He also understood that the station's greatest strength, its isolation, could become its greatest weakness if properly exploited. In the main computer core, David Park's fingers flew across alien interfaces as he executed code he'd been writing for weeks. The Coalition's security systems were incredibly sophisticated, but they were designed to prevent intrusion from the outside. They weren't designed to handle sabotage from someone who'd been given administrative access to perform routine maintenance. "How much longer?" Sarah whispered, watching the corridor for guards. 2 minutes, David replied. "I'm not just opening their systems, I'm rewriting their core security protocols. When I'm done, this station will recognize us as authorized personnel and the guards as potential threats." The genius of the plan was becoming clear to Sarah. They weren't just escaping. They were taking control of the entire facility. Marcus's group had reached the armory to find it already open, its automated defenses disabled. Thompson had been here first. Advanced weapons lay waiting for them. Plasma rifles, energy shields, combat armor designed for multiple species. Marcus picked up a rifle and checked its charge. Full power. Ready to fire. "Lock and load," he told his team. "Time to show these aliens what Earth's criminals can do when properly equipped." Commander Zektar was losing control of the situation. His security forces were scattered, his command systems were malfunctioning, and the escaped prisoners seemed to be one step ahead of every countermeasure he deployed. "Sir," Lieutenant Vexra reported urgently, "we've lost contact with the armory, and there are reports of humans carrying advanced weapons in Sector B. How is that possible?" "The armory has automated defenses that—" His question was answered when every screen in the control room flickered and went dark. When the displays came back online, they showed a new message. "Station security protocols updated. New command authority recognized." The screens now identified the escaped humans as authorized security personnel and the Coalition guards as potential hostile entities. Zektar felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years of military service. Genuine fear. The humans hadn't just escaped. They'd taken control of the station's computer systems. Thompson appeared on the command center's main screen, broadcasting from the station's communication center. He looked directly at Zektar through the camera. "Commander," Thompson said, his voice calm and professional. "My name is not Michael Thompson. My actual identity is classified, but you can call me the American Boogeyman. I'm here to collect some American citizens who were improperly detained by your government." Zektar activated his communication system. "You are surrounded, human. Surrender now, and we might show mercy." Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Commander, let me explain something about humans that your intelligence files apparently missed. We are apex predators from a world where survival required constant warfare against everything: the environment, other species, and each other. We didn't develop advanced technology first because we were too busy developing advanced killing techniques." On the tactical display, Zektar could see his guards being systematically disarmed and captured by the escaped prisoners. The humans were using weapons and tactics the guards had never encountered. They moved like soldiers, fought like demons, and showed a level of coordination that suggested extensive military training. "You see," Thompson continued, "you made the mistake of thinking that primitive technology means primitive people. But humans have been waging war for 10,000 years. We've had civil wars that killed millions, world wars that reshaped continents, and cold wars that held the entire planet hostage to nuclear annihilation. Your people have been at peace so long you've forgotten what real warriors look like." Through the station's internal sensors, Zektar watched Marcus Chen's team methodically clearing Security Sector B, moving with tactical precision that would have impressed veteran Coalition commandos. He watched Sarah Rodriguez coordinate 3 different groups simultaneously, while David Park turned the station's own defense systems against its guards. "Impossible," Zektar breathed. "How could criminals possess this level of skill?" Thompson heard him. "That's your second mistake, Commander. You assumed that crime and warfare are different things. On Earth, they're often the same thing. Marcus Chen didn't just rob banks. He fought a decade-long war against police departments and federal agencies. Sarah Rodriguez didn't just run a trafficking organization. She commanded a private army that operated across 3 continents. Every human in this facility is a veteran of conflicts your people can't imagine. The truth was dawning on Zektar. Earth's criminals weren't ordinary lawbreakers. They were graduates of the most competitive and violent criminal environment in known space. They'd succeeded in a world where failure meant death or imprisonment, where law enforcement agencies had virtually unlimited resources, and where rival criminals were constantly trying to eliminate them. "What do you want?" Zektar asked. "Simple," Thompson replied. "Transportation back to Earth for all human prisoners, compensation for wrongful imprisonment, and a formal apology from the Coalition Council. In exchange, we'll return control of your station and leave peacefully." "And if we refuse?" Thompson's smile grew wider. "Commander, I've been studying your species for 3 weeks. You're peaceful, law-abiding, technologically advanced, and completely unprepared for real warfare. I could take this station apart, piece by piece, and there's nothing you could do to stop me." To prove his point, the station's lights suddenly went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later. But the message was clear. Thompson controlled their life support systems. "You have 1 hour to contact the Coalition Council," Thompson said. "After that, I start demonstrating other human techniques for dealing with uncooperative opponents." The screen went dark. Zektar looked around at his remaining officers. Half his security force was captured. His station was under hostile control, and he was being dictated to by creatures he'd dismissed as primitive just hours earlier. He activated the emergency communication array and began composing a message to Coalition Command. The subject line read, "Urgent. Reassessment of human threat level. Required." The probably Navlound. Urgent. Urgent. 3 hours later, a Coalition diplomatic vessel arrived to negotiate the release of Station Omega-7. The human prisoners were transferred to the ship, along with their rescuer, who disappeared as mysteriously as he'd arrived. Within a week, new protocols were issued throughout Coalition space. Humans were to be treated as an alpha-level threat species, and Earth was officially classified as a military power, despite their primitive technology. Commander Zektar retired from active duty and took a position training new security officers. His first lesson always covered the same topic. Never underestimate an enemy based on their technology level. Because somewhere in the galaxy, the American boogeyman was still out there, and he had just reminded everyone that humans weren't primitives at all. They were the monsters that monsters feared.